Here. We are live. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Sorry, Rich, I still have you pinned. That's all right. As far as the viewers are concerned, this is January the 26th, 2020. I'm Mike Davis with Lovecraft eZine. Let's do introductions, and then we'll get to Paul and introduce him after we go through a few things. Why don't we start with Rick? And I want to try and give a little emphasis each time we introduce you guys from now on. For those of you who are writers and editors, uh, mention your books or at least how to get to them. So, Rick Lay, you want to introduce yourself and just, a 30-second, what kind of books you write, that kind of thing? You've been writing for a very long time.
Rick Lay, I'm a writer. I've written books about pulp heroes, chronologies of pulp heroes like Doc Savage and The Shadow. And I've written pastiches which combine Victorian detectives with pulp heroes.
Oh, okay. Two things. I'm reading for the very first time the Mothman Prophecies, which is apparently much better than the book. And it talks one passage talks about William Gibson in this house where he writes The Shadow, and apparently this dark brimmed ghost or figure of some type haunts the house. I don't know how true this is, but it's a fun thing to think about.
That is somewhat true. I think he lived in a haunted house. It's Walter Gibson.
Yes, I'm sorry. Right. More importantly, what happened to the beard?
Oh, I decided to get rid of it. My wife didn't like it.
That's always the answer, isn't it?
I'm the opposite. When I shave my beard off, she's like, no. So, okay, Rich, you do have a beard. You want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Rich. I've never written anything, much to the chagrin of folks around me. I'm just a fanboy of the Lovecraft design.
And a hell of a reader. If you look at his background there,
I read a lot. I just don't write enough.
reading is not just reading. Reading is taking an adventure in another world. So,
That's right.
it's
That's
something.
right. Thank you, Mike.
I really believe that, and as fun as TV and movies can be, you get inside the heads of characters in books that you don't in movies and TV. So,
That's
um,
right.
Matthew Carpenter.
Hey there, I'm Matt Carpenter. I edited a few books, compiled a few anthologies for Earthar Press, but they're probably done for now. So
By the late
we're looking.
great Sam Gafford.
But I do work cheap. Okay. We have a
Worked for
prize
free
today.
is what I heard.
I got 3 books out of it.
Okay,
Um,
all right,
uh,
whatever.
our prize today is a omnibus or a compilation of Mask of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu by August Derleth. It's the paperback version. It's a nice substantial book. If you love Derlethian pastiche, this is the book for you. So simply put Derleth in the subject heading and send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com.
And by the way, if you do love Derlethian pastiche, Pete Rollick wrote a book called The Lurking Chronology about Derleth stories and so forth. So that's worth picking up. We priced it very very cheaply. It's available for in print and for Kindle. So, Sean Hamill, Sean, have you written any books or just read or what's the deal?
I've written a book. Yeah, it's called A Cosmology of Monsters. It's my first novel. It came out back in September, and it's still available. I'm still finding it at bookstores whenever I go in, like Books a Million or Barnes and Noble. I don't know how much longer that lasts, but for the moment, you can find it pretty much in any regular bookstore or on Amazon, whatever.
It's
Um,
still there, Sean. I just saw it last weekend.
awesome. Thank you, Rich. Good looking out.
And Stephen King loved it, which Sean very humbly left out. So,
Yes, he did blurb my book, which was very kind of him. Just life changing. Went to my office and cried when I found out, sort of thing. So,
oh, I'm
in a
sure.
good way.
I don't know what my job title is, but I'm Mike Davis, and I run the podcast, Patreon podcast, publish books. I've slowed a little in the last couple of years, but I'm picking up speed again. I've got 3 books on the way. It's just a long, boring story, but the small press that I run is not dead. So I want to talk really, really fast and then get to Paul about upcoming guests because we've got some really good ones. First of all, we have Paul F. Olson today, who wrote a book called Whispered Echoes, which is very, very good. Next week, we got Daniel Kraus, if I'm saying his last name right, who finished a George A. Romero book. Um, and that was Romero's estate with the approval of Romero's estate. He also co-wrote with Del Toro the adaptation of what's that water movie? Forget the water movie.
Shape of Water.
Shape of Water. Yeah, thank you. Uh, and so he should be fun to talk with. Down the road, uh, we've got. I'm not going to list everybody, but March 29th, for example, we got Kevin Lucia, who I wanted on the show because he's very much a fan and writer of quiet horror, just like Charles Grant, who I really love. After that, we got Michael Sisko. Jeffrey Ford has a new book. He's coming on the show in May. Um, so so that'll be good. Uh, Paul, hey, thanks for being
Hey
on the
there.
show, buddy.
I am very glad to be here.
Um, well, I have to say that it's really ironic. I was telling these guys, I think, before you came in, that my favorite stories. Um, you wrote. I'll let you explain this and why this is so ironic. But my favorite stories are your first one, The Visitor, and your last one, Bloody Bones. So maybe you could maybe you could explain to everybody why that's really ironic.
I don't know. I peaked early, and no,
Well, no, but the stories are written. You arranged them in the book in the order that you wrote them. You were a young man when you wrote The Visitor, for example.
I was a very young man. I was probably 22 when I wrote that. It was 23 when it was in print. So
Yeah.
that was my first published story. Yeah, the stories in the book are arranged in the order they were published. So they start in 1983 and come right up to just a few years ago when I wrote Bloody Bones to be included in the collection.
Um, and they're very much. Chet Williamson does the intro to the book, and he says that you're very much a regionalist. Would you talk about that for a minute?
Well, I was really pleased when he said that because I simultaneously thought, wow, I'm a regionalist. That sounds really important. And it was all,
It does, doesn't it?
and I also thought I never realized I was a regionalist. And at the same time, I thought, yeah, that makes perfect sense because I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, way up, right. I've lived on the shores of Lake Michigan. Right now, I'm living just a few miles from the shores of Lake Superior, out in the deep woods. Just to get to my house, you've got to come down a driveway that's half a mile long and winds through the woods. And so it's a very isolated, lonely place. The total population of the entire Upper Peninsula is about 210,000 people scattered across a vast area. So per square mile, there's almost nobody here. It's lonely, it's isolated, it's strange, it's weird. And just about all my stories, with an exception here or there, are set in the Upper Peninsula. So I can, even if I'm pleased with the label regionalist because I love to be something and I love to sound important. but I couldn't deny it even if I wanted to, because I definitely have a regional flavor to my stuff.
Yeah, Chet writes while the Upper Peninsula has 29% of the state's landmass, it claims only 3% of its population, Michigan. So,
Yeah,
rugged, remote, lonely,
it's
beautiful,
very
and quite
small.
weird. Yeah,
Exactly. He hit it right on the head. I lived for a long time in a Upper Peninsula county that was the second largest county uh, area wise in the state of Michigan and the smallest in population. So
it looks like your bandwidth is low,
so
so
people are definitely scattered around.
yeah. Looks like your
I'm sorry.
bandwidth
What?
is low, so um, if you don't mind, I'm gonna stop your video for just a few minutes, and you can still
Okay.
talk, and maybe that'll help. Because most of the people who listen to this show listen to the podcast version, so um, and hopefully we can turn that back on. Chat writes
All
if
right.
the works of M.R. James, master of the malevolent ghost story, and those of early Bray Bradbury were to wed an unholy union, their offspring might be something like the works of Paul F. Olson. You know, I heard about this book through chat, and then I read that introduction, and I thought, I really have to read this book. So, when did this?
Well, the guy's got away with words, doesn't he?
Well, yeah, he is a writer and an
He's almost
actor,
like a writer or something.
almost.
Yeah.
The other thing he writes in his introduction that I really like is Olson does this the simple way, or rather the way that looks simplest, but is actually the most difficult to achieve with plain, unadorned prose, the kind that the best storytellers and poets use. It creates a quiet and altogether haunting voice that has no need to grab the reader by the shirt front and order him to, in italics, look at this writing, look how clever I am, doesn't my prose sparkle and scintillate? No, instead, Paul F. Olson says, I want to tell you a story, sit with me and listen. So, you know, that's high praise from Chet too. And from reading your book, I think
Yeah,
he's right on.
very much.
Is that what you did?
Well, that's good to hear because, yeah, that's definitely what I try to do. I try to tell a story as if I'm telling it to you, as if we're sitting together in a room, or to grab the cliche, we're sitting around a campfire somewhere and I'm telling
Right.
you the story. I know that's doesn't always come across, but if it does, if people see that and pick up on it, then I'm pleased because that's half the battle right there.
Well, I don't want to give away any plots because, um, it's a fine line between talking about a book, especially a collection, and, letting people know who are not yet aware of it, hey, this is great. I want to go pick up this book. Mike likes it. The panel likes it. And, no spoilers at the same time. But that first, it really is ironic that this collection is laid out in the order that you wrote them. In other words, starting from a young man to, I assume, somewhere near middle age to somewhere in your early 40s, as you are now, I assume.
Boy, that's flattering. Sorry to tell you, I'm 60.
Um, it's just one of the things you do in your stories is that I really like, at least in many of them, is that you don't explain. For example, in The Visitor, this guy comes to town in the UP every October, and things happen, and you don't explain who he is, what he is, why this is happening. You just basically say, look, hey, this weird thing happened and I can't explain it. Which is, I think, one of the essences of weird fiction. Uh, I tell this story sometimes on the show, or many times. My wife and I were driving down a dark road one night many years ago. Two lane, woods on either side and everything. All of a sudden, we see this run across the road, what looked exactly like a two-dimensional humanoid shadow. Okay, and if it would have just been me, I would have thought it was my imagination. But she saw exactly the same thing. So, in other words, there's something that happened. We can't explain it, and you do this a lot in your stories. Seems to me, anyway.
Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on that, and I'm especially pleased to hear that you enjoy that, you like that, because that tendency of mine has brought me equal parts pleasure and grief over the years, because I've taken my share of hits and reviews and comments from people that feel I leave things too open ended.
Really,
And it's like, but what happened? You didn't tell us what happened. And it's like, no, that's kind of the point.
the unknown is scarier.
Yeah. I think as horror fans, we agree for the most part that it's not the sight of the monster stalking into the room that's scary. It's the sound of the monster on the other side of the door before we've seen him.
Right.
And I feel that the same way, it's scarier when you don't know what's going on, and it's scarier when you don't know exactly what might have happened at the end, and also where you get to use your own imagination. I don't know. What do you think happened?
Yeah.
Why are you asking me what happened? What do you think happened? What did you want to happen? And I enjoy that kind of open-ended ending. And I've gotten a lot of praise for that over the years, but also, I've gotten my share of reviews that say the stories that were too open-ended for my taste. And they want things neatly tied up, and
Yeah.
they don't necessarily want them to live happily ever after. It's horror. They probably want them all to die a bloody, gruesome death, but they want to see that. They want to see the bloody, gruesome death on the page. And I like to leave that part to the imagination and say, did that happen? Did they?
All due respect to Stephen King, who I really think has gotten better and better and better with age, um, with his books. I loved The Outsider. I'm not going to spoil The Outsider for those who haven't read it. There's an excellent TV show, miniseries on HBO that's staying so far pretty faithful to the book. What I did not enjoy about The Outsider is at the end, Stephen King does explain what happened. And at that point, it became less, a lot less scary to me and a lot less interesting to me. And again, I say that with the greatest respect. I think the guy's, I mean, millions of people think he's a hell of a writer. He doesn't care what I think. But that's just one example. Not to put you on the spot, but are there any other authors or stories that leave things open ended, Paul, that you've admired?
Well, one of my all-time favorite writers, and for many, many years in my career, in fact, I suppose he still is, was a role model of mine, was Charlie Grant,
Oh God,
Charles L.
yes.
Grant.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of his stories really, they left things open-ended, vague, up to the imagination, and that you had to work to you had to do an equal share of work. The author didn't do all of the work. You had to do, as a reader, you had to bring something to it as well. And so he'd be the one that pops into my head first. Another one would be Ramsey Campbell, who often implies rather than draws. He draws the picture for you, but some of the lines are missing, and you have to sketch in the lines. Lately, I've been finding I'm a big fan of Adam Neville. And I find that he does that in some of his work too. So
Yeah. We've got to get him back on this show. He's a great guy, great
yeah,
writer.
I just I feel that I'm a fan as a reader of books where I have to do some of the work, and so when I'm writing, I try and return the same favor to my readers and make that, I trust them to be smart enough to be able to sketch in and fill in the blanks with anything that I might leave out, deliberately so.
While we're on this topic, the rest of you guys on the panel, are there any that leap to mind for you guys? And are you a fan of this, or do you disagree with Paul and me? Anybody? Sean?
Go ahead, Rich.
Go ahead, Rich.
I'm going to challenge this a little bit.
All right, sure.
Paul Tremblay is, when you read Head Full of Ghosts, it's open-ended at the end. You don't know what's happened at the end, right? So,
Right.
And I think it works really well for that book. But I think I guess as a phenomenon, this open-endedness, this ambiguity and horror that Paul Tremblay has pointed out, I'm not so sure that it's always a good thing.
Let me just interrupt real quick and then keep going, okay?
Go ahead.
I thought Disappearance at Devil's Rock did it really well. Paul's book. Go ahead, Rich.
I would just say that we need a little bit of and perhaps it's only personal, as I need a little bit of a reveal sometimes. If it's always open-ended, if it's always left open to the reader to decide, then the writer, I think, by definition, loses a certain amount of power in the stories they tell. And you want to see some kind of yes, it's scarier to hear the monster before he comes into the room, but eventually he comes into the room, right?
Yeah.
So if you only leave the monster outside the room and you only hear him, that's great for sometimes. But if that's I guess if that's the way that all the stories are being told, then I feel cheated, honestly.
You know what? I actually will agree with that. If every horror story you read is open-ended, then it loses its power, because then you know, hey, this is what's going to happen. But if you don't know, if you don't know Stephen King's going to do this, if you don't know that Sean Hamill's going to do this, or Paul Tremblay's going to do this, then the power comes back. So I do agree with what you're saying in that sense. Sean, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was going to second. I really like the second Paul and you to begin with. I really do like horror. Like Thomas Ligotti's probably my favorite horror writer, and there's a lot of ambiguity there and a lot of strangeness and a lot of work that I feel like the reader usually has to put in, especially in his early stuff. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about Paul's book as well, is the fact that it, like you said, it doesn't just give me everything, but it gives me enough that I can sort of paint a picture that, that's frightening and definitive enough that I feel like I got what I wanted from it. But I would be curious if, and I guess I'd throw this back to everybody, including Paul and Rich, if there's any particular examples you guys can think of, and this isn't a challenge, I'm just trying to think in my own head, my own reading, fiction that horror fiction in particular that did take sort of the open-ended approach that they really disliked. Usually it's something I end up enjoying. The big example I can think of course, is Shirley Jackson in Hill House, or I just read The Little Stranger by, was it Sarah Waters, I think, which is pretty ambiguous, and I thought that was pretty terrific. But I was wondering if there are any in particular that really.
Oh gosh, yes. Do I have one?
Okay.
Okay, this is an old book. It's gotten quite a lot of favorable notice over the years, but I couldn't stand it. And it's Dagon by Frank Chappell.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
It's like the way that this story takes place is this guy gets involved with this strange woman, and he and his wife get swallowed up. But when the things are kind of happening, he's like a prisoner in the corner watching what's happening, so he doesn't quite understand what's going on. So you never quite understand because you know the Innsmouth story and Lovecraftian fiction. You kind of know what's going on, but it's never directly explicitly stated. The problem is the prose was a chore to read, and the characters
I couldn't get into that book, Matt. Yeah.
I got into it, and it's like I've never lived it down. So
You know, I think you guys are probably all familiar with the Susan Hill's story, The Woman in Black, and was made into a movie with the kid from Harry
Harry
Potter.
Potter.
Yeah.
Uh, Another book she wrote that I think is even better is The Man in the Picture. And by the time that's over, you don't know what the fuck happened. And it's such. The very last line of that book is so horrifying. You just have to read it to understand what I mean. I'm not going to give any of it away.
You just sold a copy, Mike. Probably.
Yeah, I'm gonna go
Did
get
I?
it.
It's not a big book. It's more of a novella. So you can read it in practically one sitting. But it's a very good book. It actually drew me in because it's the beginning are these this guy with his former teacher, and they're sitting around the fire, you know, telling each other stories, and there's a January wind howling outside, and he says, the older guy says, "I wonder if I've ever told you anything about that picture over there," and there we go. So it's a really good story. So you'll have to let me know after you read it what you think.
I will.
Well, it's a classic setup, isn't it?
Yes.
I would say, responding to Sean, I read Shirley Jackson, and I was very disappointed in the ambiguity of the ending. I've gone through this whole novella, this whole build up, and I don't know what's going on at the end. Now, sometimes you want that kind of ambiguity because it leaves it. I guess the ambiguity leaves you a little bit more like what's going on, and that is scary. But and perhaps it's because the age in which I grew up reading or watching movies in, right? I know what's happening with a werewolf. I know what's happening with a vampire movie. I know what's happening with a mummy. I know what's happening with all this, and I didn't get that in the Shirley Jackson story. And
Right.
but when you read 80s horror, especially monster horror, there is a reveal at some point, right?
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
Wendigo. There's a werewolf. There's something, right?
Unless it's Charlie Grant.
well,
Or a few
Charles L.
others.
Grant, and I have several of his books, and he actually, as I showed during one of our previous conversations, he wrote. Charles L. Grant wrote some of the books that did the vampire, the werewolf, and the mummy, the Universal Studios kind
Yes.
of,
Yeah.
right? So, which I have.
Long Night of the Grave, and
Yes, I have. So but there is this part of me from perhaps it's just my generation where I need to see at least some kind of reveal. It can't be
Kids
totally
today. Kids today.
I know it can't be ambiguous. I need to see something. I don't need a full reveal, but I need to have something to link onto, something to anchor myself to. And if it's just totally open ended, then okay, that's weird fiction perhaps, but that's not horror.
Well, I
I'm
think
looking for something.
I think the open-ended that I like, Rich. I apologize for interrupting. I think the open-ended that I like is, and back to Paul, is it points you in a certain direction. For example, The Visitor. It points you in a certain direction at the end, but you're not quite sure. I mean, would you agree with that, Paul? It's your story.
Yeah, I think so. And I do often show the monster, so to speak, although I don't think I've ever written a traditional monster story, but I show the threat, whatever it is.
Yeah.
What I tend to leave open-ended is sort of what happens at the end. I'm sort of a fan of, and then they marched off to fight the war.
Yeah.
But you don't see the battle and you don't know how it came out, and that's up to you, the reader, to decide that, I guess. I don't know. It's
I
sort
would
of
say
a
that's
different
different.
version of Lady or the Tiger, I guess.
Right. I would say that's different, Paul. And I would say for everybody, that's a little bit different when you don't know how things resolve. But to know what the threat is, to leave that ambiguous, then I don't know how to take that.
I'll also, in some of my stories, I'll throw out, this is going to sound very simplistic, but in the course of the story, I'll throw out suggestions, and maybe it's this, maybe it's that. It might have been this
Right.
other thing because of this or that. And that, again, leaves it up to you at the end, perhaps, to decide, or perhaps to never be able to decide what it was. But there are definite suggestions of what it might have been, what caused it, why it was happening.
In fact, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a few weeks, Paul, but doesn't the main character, the protagonist, kind of he says to himself, "I have an idea who this guy might be, but I could be wrong," but he doesn't really say something to that
Yeah,
effect.
something like that. I think the last lines of the story now is, I wrote this story like practically 40 years ago, but I
Yeah.
think the last lines are something like, I know he's coming back. And
Yes.
I wonder what he's got work to do here. I wonder what it is.
Right. But before we get off this topic, Rick, do you have anything to add? You're muted, buddy. There you go.
Well, I just want to ask Paul a question,
Sure.
which is outside this. I always wonder how some writers view what hell would be like. And Robert W. Chambers, I got the impression that you don't burn in his version of hell, you drown forever. And I was wondering, there's a theme of drowning that runs through all your works. Is that the most horrible death in your imagination?
Yeah, I have a terrible fear of drowning, which is terrible because I actually grew up on an island. And I wasn't scared of water then, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten be very scared of water and drowning and watery ghosts and that sort of thing. That and choking are probably my two biggest fears. So an eternity of not being able to breathe and an eternity of drowning would be for sure.
Choking and drowning are kind of related, and I've had this
It,
thought too that I'd rather freeze to death. That's supposedly one of the most gentle deaths once you get past the Jesus Christ, I'm colder than hell
yeah.
part. But drowning, it just seems so horrible to me.
I recently reread a story that terrified me when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And it's a children's ghost story. And I think and maybe some of you have picked this up in an anthology over the years. I think it's called The Water Ghost of Harrowby Hall. And now you're going to ask me who wrote it, and I couldn't tell you. I'd have to look it up. I'd have to Google it.
Yeah.
That story haunted me for years, about this ghost that appears every year at midnight on Christmas Eve and stays for an hour in Harrowby Hall and soaks everything. Anybody or anything who's near this ghost gets soaked with water, and then the ghost disappears and comes back again the next Christmas Eve. I had this memory for almost 50 years in my head of this being the most terrifying story that was ever written. And I read it again about 6 or 8 months ago and realized it's actually a humorous story. It's full of dry humor and irony and wit, and it's played for laughs. But when I was 7 years old, it scared the hell out of me,
Right.
and perhaps planted a seed in the back of my mind that watery ghosts. I remember being out at Lake Mead in Nevada and being told that under the water there was the drowned town, that when they built Hoover Dam, the town was drowned. And the idea of the entire town being under that lake there, I didn't even want to go in that lake. I was scared to death.
There'd be somebody down there that grabbed you by the ankle.
These houses and buildings and everything under there for all these years. So
Somebody's going to come out of one of those houses and grab you by the ankle and say, "You're not leaving."
Of course they are. Of course they are. I know they are. You don't have to convince me. So
Okay, the
eternity of drowning would definitely be a help for me.
Okay.
The author was John Banks, and I linked it to the page
All
on
right.
Facebook.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, it's not a deep read, and but you'll be able to zip through it quickly, and it's good for some laughs. But I'll tell you what, it scared the heck out of me when I was little.
Don't worry, we'll be judging you when we read it.
So you will.
He was 7.
It was in one of those Alfred Hitchcock collections for kids, and I think it was called Haunted House Full. and it had a whole it had a Sherlock Holmes story, and it had a bunch of other stories in there, and of course they're all for kids, but it worked on me.
It was the three investigators.
No, 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 no.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I loved that series when I was a kid, and there was
I
always an
did too.
introduction by. There's always an introduction by Alfred Hitchcock.
There used to be Hitchcock anthologies for kids. I remember looking through some of them.
Yeah. Yeah, Haunted Houseful. It was a great book, and it was one of my formative influences in the horror field, I think. And yeah, you can judge me when you read The Water Ghost of Harrowby Hall.
Oh, we will. Um, you read Three Investigators when you were a kid?
Oh yes, of course I did. Yeah.
What about Brain Smitten?
No.
There was only 6 of those, so that it was really easy to miss, but they were really, really great. So
Okay.
so
Nope, I missed those.
the Three Investigators. I know I'm off track here, but the Three Investigators and that salvage yard run by Jupiter Jones' aunt and uncle, and they've got this secret base inside a trailer or whatnot that's just covered by junk, and they got 3 secret entrances, and that's their headquarters. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my god, this would be so great.
I always wanted to do that. I wanted to solve mysteries and yeah, have a secret hideout and a bat cave and
Exactly. Exactly. That was their Batcave, wasn't it?
yep.
No, I can't remember in any book that anyone ever discovered that. So,
No, not that I recall.
and there were a lot of Three Investigator books. So,
Yeah.
okay, so I gotta ask you about They Came from the Suburbs, which is another short story in Whispered Echoes. Great title for the book, by the way, Whispered Echoes. Um, is this a zombie story,
Yeah, I think
or is
so.
it one of those where it could be or not could be? One of those
No, I
things.
think I think that one was pretty clear. That was a zombie story.
Yeah,
That's actually probably the one story in the book that really departs from the regional Upper Michigan thing, and
Yeah.
that story resulted from the period of my life when I had left the island in Upper Michigan where I grew up, and my wife at the time and I had moved to suburban Chicago, and I was working for the late lamented B. Dalton chain, managing.
yeah.
stores.
I remember in the story you mentioned B. Dalton, and I'm like, man, he's dating this story.
Yeah. Well, I was working for B. Dalton at the time, and I was feeling like I was trapped in retail hell and never going to get out. And
Sean knows what
everything-
that's like.
everything except the climax, the very climax of that book, is probably something that really happened to me. Everything that he sees when he walks around the mall on his lunch breaks, the strange people that he sees acting oddly. Some of the customers in the store, I changed it to a record store, also
Yeah.
feeding the story, by the way. B. Dalton and record stores, 2 things we'll never see again.
Well, it also made me think of, especially in the cold weather, but I think pretty much in some places all 12 months before the actual stores open, when the mall itself is open, they walk through the mall to get their exercise. I mean, every morning, and they
mall
congregate and
walkers,
talk. That was the first thought that hit my mind, and then they all went nuts. So
Yeah. Yeah, but it's definitely a zombie story. I can't hide from that one, and there's not a lot of ambiguity in there, I think. And it was sort of a play on Dawn of the Dead and
yeah,
and that type of thing. And it was just I really wrote that one out of frustration of what was my retail career at that time, and also just for fun. And I recall it was written very quickly and easily, and but yeah, of course, they're zombies. There's not a lot of perhaps, maybe not in that one.
Paul, Ramsey Campbell worked at Borders, so you're in good company working in the bookstore.
Yeah,
I worked
That's
at
right.
Barnes and Noble for 8 years, so I'm right there with
Okay.
you.
I left B. Dalton right before Barnes and Noble bought them. So
Oh, nice.
I just got out before the Barnes and Noble
Take over.
purge.
I wanted to. This is a couple months ago. I wanted to take a picture of Sean's book, and I live about an hour from the Arlington Barnes and Noble that he worked at, and we go there sometimes, because there's no bookstores in this little town. So I wanted to take a picture of his book because I'd seen it in other places online where it was next to. Who was it next to, Sean? It was next to Paul's, right? Or somebody? Was it somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, it's but I've seen it next to Paul's and Joe Hill's.
Yeah, it was
Couple
next.
times.
Yeah, it was next to Joe Hill's and Paul Tremblay's.
Oh, terrible placement. Terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Stephen King's son and Stephen King's adopted son. Um, and Sean's book was like right in the middle, and I wanted to take a picture if it was there, and so I walk up to somebody and I say, I'm looking for a book called The Cosmology of Monsters, and he is like, that guy used to work here, and now he's a writer and everything. I'm like, yeah, I know, I did, just want to take the picture. So I had instant fame since I knew you, Paul, or Sean, sorry.
I'd love to get next to Joe Hill. The closest I came was I used to sell some books because people mixed up Paul F. Olson and F. Paul Wilson.
This,
I had a
this
guy come up to I had a guy. I was at a convention and I was at an autograph table after a panel that I had done, and a guy in line had a copy of my book and he slammed it down on the table and said, I bought this in the dealer's room, and then I realized it wasn't F. Paul Wilson.
well, whose fault is that?
He said, I took it back and the guy at the table wouldn't refund my money. And I thought, oh God, he's going to ask me to refund his money more. And then he said, so I figured, what the hell, I might as well have you sign it. Okay.
Yeah, after yelling angrily at you, can you sign this?
Yeah, because I wasn't F. Paul Wilson.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've had Paul on the show a couple times. Last time he was on, Rick, I think it was you, who had this hypothesis that Lee Child had at least partly gotten the idea for Jack Reacher from Repairman Jack F. Paul Wilson's. And I asked Paul if that was the case, and he said, no, I don't really think so. It would have been very easy for him to say, yeah, I think so, but he didn't think so.
That
So,
wasn't me.
that wasn't you? I'm sorry.
Probably was Pete.
It was someone. It was one of the panelists who's not here. It was probably Pete or Kelly or Ben, or possibly all three of those guys. So yeah. Is and when I emailed everybody, all the panelists that you were going to be on, the first response I get back was from Kelly Young going, not to be confused with F. Paul Wilson.
So it survives even today.
Yep, yep. So
Yeah, I actually did. Honestly, I had another guy come up to me. I don't think it was that same convention. It was another one around that same time, and he handed me a copy of F. Paul Wilson's book to autograph. And for just a moment, I was going to do it, and I thought, let him take it. And 20 years from now, when he tries to sell it somewhere, and the dealer tells him this is a forgery, he'll have no idea how he got a forged copy of this signed book.
yeah,
But I was the nice guy, and I told him, no, I'm Paul F. Olson, not F. Paul Wilson.
did you ever regret the F in the middle, or do you think it got you more sales?
No, I regret it a lot. When I was starting out in the 80s, everybody used a middle initial, About the only one who didn't was Stephen King. Everybody else had a middle initial, and
Yeah,
gradually
Dean
that
R.
mania for
Koontz, Dean
yeah,
R.
that
Koontz,
mania for
Charles
middle
L.
initials
Grant.
went away. Robert McCammon, he was Robert R. McCammon, and
Yeah.
he's just Robert McCammon, and everybody dropped their middle initials, and I just kept mine because I had it in my website name. I'm stuck with it. So
Yeah, Dean R. Koontz, and then Dean R. Koontz was a bald guy with a mustache who
yeah,
looked like he stepped out of a '70s porn film on the back of his
exactly.
books. And then today he's Dean Koontz. He's got a full head of hair, a big smile on his face, no facial hair, and he's petting a dog. So
Yeah.
you lose that middle initial, man, you change.
Yeah, I probably should have dropped mine, and look what it did for his career. So
Well, you're in your early 40s. You know, it's probably too late to change it. So,
Yeah. On the other hand, if I really was in my early 20s, I'd have.
so okay. Before I continue, anybody else on the panel want to shoot Paul some questions? John.
Yeah, I had a couple. So the first thing I guess I wanted to ask about was my favorite story in the book, which is Through the Storm.
Okay.
About the kid at his great aunt's, and she's trying to teach him palmistry and whatnot. And I was just curious if you could talk about a little bit about the genesis of that story, where that, how that came about.
You didn't tell him the thing you told me though. That
Which,
it scared the hell out of you.
oh yes, it did scare the hell out of me. Yes, it was a very, very scary story. It was, I think very easy, but that one genuinely gave me the creeps. It reminded me of some. My grandparents weren't nearly this creepy, but I had a vivid imagination. So there were some afternoons where I thought for sure they were going to murder me. So,
Yeah.
so I
Well,
kind of identified a little bit.
well, I think we all can relate somewhat to at some point in our childhoods being forced into the arms of a repellent older relative, and here, give Aunt Shirley a kiss, or give Grandma Edna a hug. And Grandma Edna usually had a very strange smell, and she was large and odd looking. And you wanted to be anywhere else. You wanted to be off somewhere playing, watching TV, and you didn't want to be anywhere near, Grandma Edna or Aunt Shirley.
Right.
So there is a lot of that in the story, just that universal sort of childhood experience. Beyond that, the genesis of the story was, boy, that one was really just one sentence after another. I sat down with not much of anything in mind but the opening sentence. And I just kind of, wrote that sentence, and then I wrote another one, and all of a sudden there was a kid named Andy, and all of a sudden there was a whatever she was, grandmother, it was built one sentence at a time. There wasn't any great wow, I could do a story about
Right.
this and things in the basement, the things in the basement, which maybe I just spoiled it for people, but I hope not.
Yeah, I was gonna.
I didn't know about them until they appeared.
No, I
I
don't.
was as
I don't think you
surprised as I
spoiled
hope. I hope I was as surprised as I hope the reader is when they get to that point, because I had no idea they were there until suddenly they were. So
And
that was a story that was really just built one sentence at a time, and I found my way through it and discovered the story right along with the reader, I guess. And it was written very quickly and easily, as I recall. I'm not, I struggle with short stories a lot. I always have. I still do to this day. I certainly did back then. But every once in a while, there were a couple of stories that just kind of flowed, and that was one of them.
that was going to be, yeah, my next question is if the one sentence at a time method is your sort of usual style of storytelling, or if you're sort of more of a planner ahead of time. For me, I don't like to do too much planning, but I usually like to have a pretty good idea of what the story is going to be before I start writing. So the times whenever it comes that easily are kind of a miracle for me. So I was kind of curious, what is your usual process, and is it different for short stories and novels?
Well, the one sentence at a time method is absolutely wonderful when it works
Right.
from beginning to end, which is almost never.
Right.
Because by following one sentence at a time and just going exactly where the story leads, most 9 times out of 10, it leads me into a dead end from which there's no escape. And my file drawers and my computer hard drive are full of aborted stories.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm
Robert.
naturally a little bit of a planner too, although I'm not a detailed outliner, but I'm always planning at least a little bit ahead. I'm in this scene, here's what's going to happen in the next scene. And maybe the scene after that, and I feel my way ahead to the end of the story that way. Like I said, one sentence at a time can be great fun, but boy, it's a risk, it's a gamble, because good chance of never getting to the end.
It, If memory serves, Robert Frost made that claim about stopping by woods on a snowy evening. He's my favorite poet, and he just said he just sat down and wrote it, but not with a lot of his other poems. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So would you say, I'm sorry, if somebody else wants to jump in, please.
No,
It's
go
just,
go ahead.
so would you say that how much planning goes into a novel for you before you write it? You say short stories are kind of hard. Did you find novels easier?
I found novels easier, except the one I've been working on now for the last couple of years is probably going to kill me. But that's a rare one. I do find novels easier than short fiction, and I think it's the ability to spread out and pursue some of those leads that you're not sure where they're going, and you can still salvage things if they don't go in the right direction. You can take the novel in a different direction, or you can back up and go somewhere else. Whereas when I write a story into a dead end, I feel that the story is dead. But a novel, I feel that there's a lot of different ways to resurrect it and salvage it and rework it. That's what I'm doing now with my work in progress. Again, not terribly successfully at the moment, but I ultimately have hope because I'm an optimist, I guess.
Sean, while
Yeah.
you're talking,
Yeah.
can we talk about the shirt?
Oh, sure. Yeah, speaking of Stephen King, I'm wearing my You'll Float 2 shirt. So it's got
Awesome.
a Pennywise on it here. You can kind of see.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Yeah, I didn't wear it on purpose. It's just like I wasn't deliberately picking this out, but this is kind of my wardrobe recently as I bought a lot of horror themed t-shirts for book tour. So this is what
Yeah,
I wear every day.
yeah. Guys, any more questions for Paul before I continue?
Yeah, I actually have one, Paul.
Sure.
So, how do you get from regionalism to cosmic? So, and I'm thinking of folks who might be new, new readers to cosmic horror. How do you get
Hmm.
from focusing on a region to all of a sudden talking about cosmic issues? So, when I read you, is it, I read Lord of the Rings, or I
Yeah.
see Star Wars, very cosmic, explicitly cosmic in their scope. How do I get how am I to take regional horror, um, put forth as cosmic horror? How do I do it? And I asked that because I just finished Adam Neville's new book, The Reddening,
Yeah.
which is a folk regional horror novel, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
there may be some cosmic elements in that. But so how do I understand cosmic horror versus any other type of horror? As somebody, if I'm new to this, and again, I'm thinking of folks who might be new to this. I'm thinking, hey, I've seen a vampire movie, or I've read a vampire novel, or I've read a werewolf, or seen a werewolf movie, or I've seen some kind of a monster. What is it that makes it cosmic, especially when you're focusing on a region?
Well, before Paul answers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really see any cosmic horror in Whispered Horrors, unless I'm
Whispered
missing a thing.
Echoes. Yeah.
Yeah, in Whispered Echoes, yes, sorry.
Yeah. There's nothing really cosmic in there.
Well, when I read anything Lovecraftian, right?
Yeah.
Anything that I'm assuming it's cosmic. So,
Well,
am I
no,
wrong? Am I wrong in that?
I was
you
going
know,
to say, is it
Yeah, you
to,
are.
an- to,
Perhaps I
well,
am, and that's okay. I
well, if I can just say, it's like part of the issue is okay. If you look at deep time
Hmm.
and the scope of evolution, the distances involved in space, well, all that's very cosmic. But what makes it relevant to us is how does that affect you as a human? You know what I mean? It's like, what is the experience in a relationship? What is the experience of a person who has a brush with something like that, where it sort of shakes their foundations of a mundane existence? So the fact that it's regional could be that this is this person's context. Do you see what I mean? And then all around you are things that actually, if you actually looked at them, they would cause you to say, "Oh my gosh!" It's like you're walking in a stream, enjoying the rural area, and you come across the fossil of a trilobite.
Hmm.
And when you start really thinking about what does that mean, that this organism lived and breathed and ate and mated and died millions and millions of years ago, and yet all you have is its impression in a rock. That's the only whisper of its existence that's still present. Okay, so it's not so much that the region the guy's walking in is cosmic. It's how does his experience in this region brush up against what you might consider as deep time, deep space,
Yeah.
incomprehensibility.
Can I
But Matt,
can I
I would
wait?
ask Matt.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
jump in real quick, Rich? Because first of all, Matt, that's very well said, and I think we have the two components that Matt mentioned. We have deep time, and we have deep space. A lot of people don't think about one or the other. I mean, for example, the Milky Way galaxy where we reside is 100,000 light years long. That's incredibly big. But the next galaxy over, Andromeda, is 250 million light years away, if memory serves. And that's just the next galaxy over. Okay, now let's talk about deep time. If you, real quick, if you compress the age of the Earth, the age of the universe is not quite 15 billion years, I believe. The age of the Earth is like 4.7 billion years. Okay, if when the Earth began, if you start a 24-hour day at midnight and you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, a few seconds before midnight again, that's when we appear. I mean, that's deep time, and that's only considering the Earth. That's not even considering the universe. So I
Is that
apologize for jumping in, but go ahead.
no, no, no? I love that, Mike. Thank you. My question would be then: do you not get that when you read? If I'm reading a vampire or a werewolf or a Wendigo or some other monster novel where you come out of the mundane and all of a sudden your experience is turned head over heels. Do you
Okay,
not think of things like that? So
no, no, no,
For
no,
Matt,
because
okay,
it's like you're thinking about like the 19th century. The werewolf and vampire tropes kind of really came to the fore then, and
right,
those really are just human problems dressed up. Okay, the
Yes.
story
Yes.
Little Red Riding Hood. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, Little Red Riding Hood. The girl's walking through the woods and meets a wolf is like a cautionary story that was told to young girls in France, I think, about the wolves who lived in Paris, per se. That doesn't have to be anything cosmic. That's actually a revenant has a human motivation. A vampire is an undead human. Okay. That actually is not cosmic at all,
Right.
in my view. If you want to read something cosmic from that time period, there's that famous old story, The Horla. That's more cosmic, in my opinion.
Or
And
here's regional and cosmic, and I love plugging this book because it's the first book I ever published, and it's the reason why I became a small press publisher. And it's a book called The Sea of Ash by Scott Thomas. Now, Rich, it's very regional. It's New England. However, this,
that's right. Yep,
yeah,
sure,
one of the characters, he comes upon this nude woman on a beach. He lives near the beach. He brings her in. He tries to care for her. He's a doctor and everything. And I won't spoil what happens, but one of the things that he says to himself is, and I brought this up so I could quote it: "Never had the universe felt so vast, and I so small within it. I had, through circumstance, been made aware of something, but of what? Something either too horrible or too beautiful for humans to know." So there you have regional and cosmic in the same story.
Yeah.
no, I that's why I love coming on here talking to you guys who who have done who have more experience in this than I do, because I love being shown that I have wrong thinking, because it helps me to understand this more, because I just love this. I love horror. I love cosmic horror. I love regional horror. Actually, I love local horror. But I would ask. But let me say this to Matt as well, and to Mike. And to Paul, and to anybody on the panel, please, is if I were to encounter Dracula, I can guarantee you that my thinking would be cosmic. It would be like, obviously, the realm of human experience is far more vast than what I think in the mundane world.
Okay,
but if you take the vampire Marius in Anne Rice's book, one of Anne Rice's vampire novels, he's 2,000 years old. Okay,
he is. Yep.
But compared to the age of the Earth, he's an infant, so he's not cosmic at all.
Right.
But does that not bring you out of your okay, if there is something like that, that means there's other things like that in terms of.
Well, the thing is, you're talking about definitions that are fuzzy. There's no precision, but what I think you're talking about is actually a ghost is a deceased human. A vampire is a transformed human. Their existence is within the human world and the human experience.
Even a Wendigo is usually in most stories a transformed human of some sort.
So it's really that. Cosmic to me is you're walking along, you're a dinosaur, you're having a good day, you're the DOP species, and a comet hits your planet and you're all dead.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cosmic. It's like everything you were thinking in your dinosaur brain, which we don't know how intelligent the dinosaurs were.
The universe did not care about the dinosaurs.
It was completely erased. So that's
you guys are making me want to write a vampire story where the vampires are cosmic. They come from deep space and deep time.
I will read it. I will read it, Paul.
We actually had that from Colin Wilson, the space vampire.
That's true.
Okay. Yeah,
what you do is you put them in San Francisco in 1968, and they'll say "Cosmic Man."
No.
But let me think this. But any encounter with the supernatural or the supernormal, right, makes you think there is something more than just the physical world, right? There's something.
Oh, sure.
It takes you outside, which makes you think of cosmic things. Just thinking of God, that's cosmic, right? It would make you think if this thing exists, then this also must exist, right? So
so Rich, have you seen a movie called The 13th Floor?
I have not seen that. No.
All right.
I'll look for it. No.
Okay. Anyone listening to me should. Now this came out in 2000. Anyone listening to me that enjoys what we're talking about should watch The 13th Floor, and for God's sake, don't read anything about it. Don't watch any trailers, nothing. Just pop in the DVD player or rent it on Amazon or whatever you're going to do, and then get back to me. Write me at lovecraftezine@gmail.com, or you guys tell me. But getting back to... Go ahead.
I would just say that, as a Patreon, I'm going to put in a plug here.
Yes.
Being able to come on here and talk to guys like you, Sean, Rick, Matt, Paul, as authors who think about these things and write about these things. This is an opportunity.
I'm just laughing because you didn't mention my name.
Okay. Also,
I'm kidding, man. I'm kidding.
Also, this dude named Mike with
kidding.
Silver hair.
I have silver hair.
Silver hair.
I'm kidding you, man. I don't care. I don't have much of an ego.
But just being able to, run these ideas by it really does help me, and it forces me to think about what is horror, what are the different gradations of horror, what is cosmic versus other types of horror,
right?
What is horror versus thriller versus other things,
and sometimes they mesh, Rich. Sometimes they mesh.
Certainly.
Many times they mesh.
Absolutely. And I love being able to hear, folks who, like Matt and Rick and Sean and and Paul and yourself, who have thought about these things for as many years, and I'm about your age, so you guys have decades of experience in this stuff. So
Okay,
it
I
is
got to tell you,
really
what you just mentioned, it brought to mind a book.
In Matt's
Okay.
case, centuries of experience.
Okay,
Sorry,
by
Matt.
by Peter Watts, called Starfish, and the people are being genetically modified, physically
Paul, I
modified,
promise you, we'll get back to you.
so they can
No,
they
I'm,
can they
I'm
can
loving
go
this. So.
they can go on deep dives, and they live in the sub ocean, and they encounter a bacteria, because this is so cool. It's like Peter Watts is a biologist by training,
Hmm.
and they discovered a bacteria that was different than normal bacteria, uh, but its ability to incorporate sulfur into itself was 10,000 times weaker than normal bacteria, the bacteria of the dominant evolutionary form. Okay, well, he hypothesized, what if it was lurking in a place in the ocean all by itself, but it was able to incorporate sulfur 10,000 times more avidly than normal organisms? So suddenly, this this bacterium is out in the wild, and it can compete for sulfur better than any other thing on Earth. And they are relying on these artificial brains to help them make decisions about things that are made from like squid neurons. And a squid neuron brain thing is they're communicating with it to try and see what it would do in this circumstance. And the one guy who's a psychologist who thinks he has it figured out asks the brain, "Do you prefer checkers or chess?" And this brain says, "Better." He says, "Which one do you like better?" He says, "Better. That's a very difficult word." That's what the brain says. And the man says, "Okay, think of better as more good." And the brain says, "Checkers." And what it turns out was real biology.
Rather than chess.
Yeah, well, listen, real biology is incredibly complicated and redundant, with a million dead ends and repetitions, and coming up with eyes and flying and limbs,
Yeah,
many
the
different
blind
ways.
watchmaker. Yeah.
Okay, there's all these dead ends, and so this representation that this thing making a decision about our safety preferred simplicity over complexity, and it chose in favor of this other organism because it was so simple, compared to world biology, which is so complicated. Now, to me, that is like what you're trying to do is simplify, and things can't be simplified or reduced necessarily to digestible bits. But this is actually, I didn't like the sequels, but this book itself is extremely cosmic.
The author's name again?
Peter Watts.
Peter Watts. He's really
Oh, okay.
well worth reading. And what was that?
And the book is Starfish.
Okay.
There are 3 books in the series. You won't be able to avoid reading the other 2. I know you're addicted, okay, but the first book is just a bloody brilliant tour de force.
All right.
So then I'll ask Mike and Matt, and actually everybody on the panel, Sean, Rick, Paul, why read horror? Why read cosmic horror in particular? What do I get out of that as opposed to reading Emily Bronte?
I'm very drawn to cosmic horror, deep time, deep space, because I've always been interested in astronomy. And to me, cosmic horror more or less states what the universe actually is like. Matt mentioned the dinosaurs going on their merry way, and all of a sudden an asteroid hits. The universe did not give a damn that the asteroids died. The universe doesn't care about the dinosaurs. It doesn't care about us. And we're here for about the relative time of a mayfly, and we're gone.
So my way I handle this is I just watch Hallmark Christmas movies, and I'm fine.
So
I find some comfort in the idea of the cosmic horror, the indifference of the universe, because if I think about it in terms of, like the implicit worldview of a Hallmark Christmas movie, which is that there is a God who cares about everything and all of that, then it I don't know, there's something so much more comforting about that nihilistic idea of like, no, none of it really matters, so nobody has to answer for the fact that like the dinosaurs were wiped out. It's just something that happened, or every bad thing that happens, nobody, at a grand scale. I mean, obviously if you murder somebody, you're answerable for that, but like the tragedy of life itself isn't really about having somebody answer for it. It's just about coming to terms with that tragedy. And that's what's so amazing about cosmic horror to me, is sort of leaning into that and taking it further than Lovecraft did, because Lovecraft seemed to freak out at that point, whereas I'm like, no, this is great. Like, let's start here and go from there.
yeah,
So
and
Sean,
two
then,
things.
so is the love of cosmic, is it necessarily that it's an atheistic genre then?
I don't think, not for me. For
Doesn't
me,
have to be.
yeah, I think for me it's very similar to a religious experience. It's giving a structure. It's using narrative to make sense of the universe, or the world or whatever. It's just looking in a different direction, I guess, trying to make sense of it. So it's still, you're still using fiction to place yourself, give yourself context, give yourself, a why, even if that why is just because.
Many.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. Many people like countries like Denmark, Sweden. They go to church just because it's a tradition. Much of the country are pretty much atheists, but they get married in church and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of people are. I don't want to generalize, but I think we all could agree that a lot of people are religious because of fear of death, and they also because they feel like if there's no God, then how do we know what's right or wrong? Well, for that latter point, Robert Heinlein wrote, "The only sin is in hurting other people unnecessarily. All other sins are invented nonsense." As far as the fear of death, I'm human. I used to be afraid of death, but and I'm not the person who came up with this, but it was very comforting to me. I don't remember before I was born. There's this huge void that I just did not exist. And that same huge void is going to happen after I die. It didn't hurt me before, it's not going to hurt me later. So, there you have my 2 cent philosophy on everything. So,
This actually, did you ever read the story A Colder War by Charlie Strauss?
I
This
can't get into Charlie Strauss.
Well, this story is well worth reading. It's available free online.
Yep,
But
I've read that. It's wonderful.
You get to the end, and death isn't death. It's not like Stephen King in Revival. But
That's why I hate Revival so fucking much.
Well, the thing is, like,
I mean, I love it, but it's not a book I would ever read again.
our hero is worried about his wife and children who are left on Earth when they escape through a gateway, and the voice in the back of the head is saying, they aren't dead. They're alive within the simulation spaces of its mind, reliving all their possible deaths.
Oh, Jesus.
It's like, so that is like it, or the Eater of Souls, or Cthulhu was like, you were so small that just for whatever entertainment value or inexplicable reason, you weren't allowed to die. It's really quite a creepy concept.
Have you guys?
I thank you for that, Matt. I do love that story, and coming, my perspective, my worldview is coming as a theist, right? I am not an atheist, right? But please fear not, I am not offended by anything. So please, but I would say that I fundamentally disagree with the Lovecraftian worldview, but I still love I still love the fiction and the point of view that he brings forth in his fiction, and that generated a whole genre of fiction after him. Um, so I do not agree with Lovecraft. I do not
Mhm.
think that the universe is cares cares doesn't care about you. So if you think differently, please, I'm not offended. Please bring that forth. Which is why I love having this conversation with you guys.
Well, I want to get back to Paul real quick before I do that.
Paul who?
Yeah, Paul,
Oh.
F. Paul Wilson is on the
Yeah,
show today.
okay.
Sorry,
there you
Paul.
go.
Sorry.
Do not. If you may not want to look up, you may not want to Google something called Roko's basilisk if you've read A Colder War. So, getting back to Paul. Paul, I'm so sorry, but I
No,
hope
I've
you
been
enjoy.
loving every minute of it.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Talk about what you love. I've got other questions for you, but talk about what you love so much about the UP. You and I were talking about this a little bit. I was talking about Iowa cornfields in winter, and
Yeah.
driving out of these country roads, and it's just so desolate, but
Well, I love
but
that too.
beautiful.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, I spent some years in northern Illinois, and we used to spend a lot of time driving out through the millions of acres of flat farmland, which in the winter is about the closest to cosmic horror we can find on Earth, because it's just
Exactly.
illimitable space and skies that go on forever, and not another living thing anywhere around, just you lost in this vast landscape. And I love that.
Yeah.
But
Laird Barron's talked about that with Alaska, but go on.
yeah, well, and up here in northern Michigan, it's the same kind of isolation, but yet completely different, because here it's very claustrophobic, because everything is deep woods and hills and water pushing in on you on all sides, and so it's the same sense of the horror that comes from isolation. Um, but yet completely different than being out in the vast plains of Midwest America. So I do love that sort of creepy weirdness that we have all around us up here. I also love it that there aren't a lot of people, and the towns are small and the people are friendly, and we look after our neighbors when things go wrong, and it's a great place to live. Uh, it's not known for its culture. No, we don't have a lot of culture around up here, so you have to thank God for the internet.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have the internet.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot different 30 years ago,
Right.
because then there really was nothing. And
Um. Yeah.
but I like being somewhere where you've got to drive 50 miles to get to the nearest city. So that's not quite the setting I'm in right now, but I've been in that type of setting. So where we had to, we were 50 some miles from McDonald's and Walmart for many years, and that's not a bad thing.
No.
The
Hey.
furthest away in the U.S. you can get from McDonald's is like 107 miles, somewhere
Yeah.
in the American Southwest. You really can't escape it.
No. 50 miles is pretty good, and I did have that for quite a while. Now I'm about, I don't know, 15 miles. So.
Real quick, Rich, I see your comment on the side that the public can't see. No problem at all. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate you being a patron, because you're paying at a high level to be on the panelists, and people like you keep me going. So thank you very much. That said, Paul, please refresh my memory. You have a story in Whispered Echoes, and I'm blanking on the title right now, where things kind of go awry in the town.
Only one? Yeah.
Well, no, I'm talking about the one where, you know, things really go awry. Like one guy's house, there's no doors.
The more things change.
Yes, that's right. The more things change. And you know what? When I was reading that, I thought of this Robert R. McCammon's
Oh,
Blue World, This is a collection that everybody should read. I read this when I was a kid, like 20 years old or something. And there's a story called Something Passed By. And your story reminded me of that. It wasn't derivative of that, but it reminded me of that. Um, so
Yeah, I hadn't read the McCammon story when I wrote The More Things Change, but yes, I can definitely see the similarities.
yeah, you've read it since then.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I can't say enough about Blue World. If anyone listening out there hasn't read it, Robert R. McCammon, Blue World.
That's wonderful. I think
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in the acknowledgments for that book.
Are you serious?
I think so.
Wow.
At least I was in the first edition.
Introduction. Let's see.
That's okay. You don't have to
Yes.
find it.
Oh yeah, acknowledging F. Paul Wilson. I'm kidding. I'd like to thank a number of people. Let's see if I can find it real quick without boring everybody. Some guy named Stephen King and Peter Straub, Charles L. Grant. I know who that is. Joe and Karen Lansdale, Dean R. Kuntz.
So that dates that, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Ray Bradbury. Now it must be in the first edition. I don't know. Either
Yeah,
that or
probably.
I'm missing it, and that's quite possible. But yeah, it's a great collection, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's wonderful. McCammon's longtime favorite of mine. So
yeah, Boy's Life is one of my favorite books, and not really horror, but just a great book.
incredible.
Yeah,
And Swan Song.
Swan Song.
I really
Yeah,
liked Mystery Walk, but that's my deep cut favorite McCammon book.
Yeah, and I've always been fond of
Mystery Walk.
Yeah, Mystery Walk and Usher's Passing.
Yep.
And I think those came out back to back. So.
Swan Song is great as well.
All right. Let me pause and see if anybody else has questions for Paul. Anyone? Bueller?
I mean, I've got another one that's just more of like a writing or Paul's personal history question.
Go right ahead.
Which is, I think in the introduction to this book, Paul, you talked about how you stopped writing fiction for a while, and were working, on a newspaper for a long time. Was that just like practical? Like, this is how I have to make my living? Was there?
Yeah, that was
reason?
Life.
Okay, fair enough.
Was Life intervened.
Was there something in particular that brought you back to fiction after so long away, like a specific moment or feeling, or was it something you'd been itching at for a while? Or
Yeah, I had always been itching. It never went away. It was just having the opportunity to do it, and the opportunity finally did come to leave the newspaper life behind and escape and get back to what I consider my real life. Life intervened and forced me to be a journalist, and then I got back to my real life by escaping the journalism. So, but yeah, the desire to write fiction never went away. So
There are quite a few well-known writers who are like that. I mentioned Jeffrey Ford's going to be on the show in a few months, and he's retired now, I believe, but he worked his entire life and kept writing.
Yeah.
I mean, you get things like insurance and things like that, which are nice.
I'm working a full-time job myself right now, so I get it.
Yeah.
Joe Lansdale told me really early on in my career, like I'd probably just published The Visitor at that point and nothing else. And he told me that do whatever it takes to pay the bills, but avoid teaching and journalism, which are the two things that writers tend to go into. But with teaching, you get so consumed by dealing with other people's words, and in journalism, you're so busy writing things that you really don't want to write. And he said any other career is fine. He said work in a gas station, drive a cab, but just journalism and teaching. So of course, I went into journalism.
Man,
So, Paul,
would you would get some
you don't get
story.
the So, Paul, you don't get the questions we've been asking you tonight, then, as a teacher.
Ignore Lansdale.
I've done a lot of workshops and things, and I've taught some programs I taught English classes for at-risk kids, so I do have a classroom experience.
Speaking of Joe Lansdale, I emailed him a couple years ago and I said, "Do you want to be on the show?" He said, he's like, "Yeah, sure." And then I explained to him that it's like this. He's like, I don't know how to do that. So thanks to Ben Handelman, who's not here. Otherwise, I'd probably be running this show with two Commodore 64s or something. Uh, the new version of things, there's actually a call-in phone feature. So I got to remember to ask Joe Lansdale if he'll do that. So um, I'm trying to remember Jeff Ford's upcoming collection. I think it's Out of Body, maybe. I don't know. It comes out sometime in May, I think. So, um, Paul, I enjoyed every one of the stories in that book. I really appreciate Chet Williamson, if you're listening, to pointing me in Paul F. Olson's direction. You've got a novel too, right, Paul?
Yeah, I have a couple of novels. Only one is available right now. My vampire novel is out of print at the moment,
All right.
and may be available again at any given time if I can decide exactly what to do with it and how to do it.
Okay.
But I have a non-horror novel called Alexander's Song that is available as an ebook right now,
Okay.
and
What's that about?
it is a sort of a literary mystery about a man who starts digging into the life of his literary hero, who is a writer from the era of Ernest Hemingway and Fitzgerald and things. And he starts digging into that writer's life and discovers some deep, dark secrets and some dangerous secrets, and that there.
I always like that kind of story. That sounds
Yeah.
interesting. What the title again?
It's called Alexander's Song,
Alexander's Son.
and
Okay.
yeah, and it's one of my favorite things I ever did. It has some otherworldly elements in it, and some elements of mystery and suspense and thriller, and it crosses a lot of genre lines. And when I first wrote it in the early 90s and tried to sell it, that was the reason it didn't sell. Everybody told me, we love this book and we don't know how to market it. And so it languished for a lot of years, unsold and unpublished, until the self-publishing craze came along. And then I decided, heck with it, I'm going to do it myself. Because I would drag the thing out every couple of years and read it again, and say, this thing still holds up to me.
I see it, and it's on Kindle Unlimited. I am sold. I'm going to get this thing.
It's a little odd. It's a little different. It does cross a lot of genre lines. I wrote it under the influence of Peter Straub and a couple of other people. But it's not horror. So
No,
and
that's
then
fine. I think we would all get
it
very,
is
very
reasonable.
stale if all we read was horror. I read mysteries, I read science fiction. I do love cosmic horror. I do love horror, but I I think I think I would get pretty stale only reading that. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, it was a fun book to write, and I'm glad it's available now. It's got a great quote on the cover from one of your upcoming guests, Kevin Lucia, who's so
And Kevin Lucia has a quote on the front of Whispered Echoes. I
Whispered
forgot.
Echoes. He does.
Yeah,
He's been a good friend, so a good supporter.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
I
looking
really look
forward.
forward to meeting him. I've talked to him several times in emails. I contacted him recently about being on the show, and I'm very, very glad that he accepted. Uh,
He and I have very similar views about quiet horror and what makes effective horror, and we're very similar in that way. So we respond to each other's work quite
I'm right
well.
there with you on the quiet horror. I was not informed enough last time I did. This was like 5 years ago. I did a show about Charles Grant, and I basically just invited Chet, because um, I had been doing this for too long. I didn't know Kevin Lucia, for example. I didn't know you, but I'd like to do another show about Charles Grant and Quiet Horror at some point, and have all you guys on here talking about it. That I think that would be very, very interesting. So,
Yeah, yeah. I was a veteran of the when there was actually the in the late '80s, and there was a little war between quiet horror and then splatterpunk, and I was on the front lines of the quiet horror army for a while. And,
but that's the
uh,
thing. It doesn't have to be it's a false dichotomy, isn't it? It doesn't have to be
it
one or the
definitely
other.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems foolish now in retrospect, but boy, in 88, 89, 90, that was a real thing. What side of the battle you were on.
Yeah.
And now it just seems a shame that we ever went through that.
Uh, I want to say again how much, and if I didn't enjoy the book, I wouldn't have invited you on the show. I don't write or talk about books that I don't like. It's very, very rare. If I don't like a book, I just don't mention it. But if I love a book, I do mention it, and a lot of times I try to get the author on the show. Um, and I'm glad you came on. I want to say that I did enjoy every story in this book. That said, like I said, The Visitor and Bloody Bones are my two favorite stories.
Yeah.
But I can really see with Bloody Bones how, I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but how your craft improved with age. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that that's true of all writers, and I'd much better than the other way. Boy, you really went downhill as you got older.
yeah, well, I think you said in your introduction that you had this temptation to polish the stories that
Yeah,
you wrote when you were younger, and you ultimately felt like that was a mistake. And in your words, you wanted to just publish it, warts and all. I got to
exactly.
say, I don't see any warts, but I do see how Bloody Bones, uh, y- as I say, you really improved with age. So,
Well, I'm glad to hear, that you feel that way, and I love getting great comments on that story. And I was thrilled when it got nominated for the World Fantasy Award a couple of years ago, uh, because, well, who doesn't like a little recognition now and then? But
right.
after sort of coming back from what was a long layoff, it was nice to know that you can still do it once in a while.
Right. That's exactly right. Well, we got a few other things to talk about, unless anyone else has a question for Paul. And I know you wanted to stick around after we talked to you, Paul.
Yeah, I'll stick around. I'm sorry my video didn't work, but
Your video is fine. I turned it off. If I hope I'm not offending you, I turned it off because I keep getting messages that your bandwidth is low and it was affecting your audio, which is the most
yeah,
important thing.
yeah,
So,
no, yeah, that's the drawback to living out here in the middle of the deep woods.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, like I said,
We're lucky I'm not doing signal flags or
I have a nice core of people, for example, right now who seem to make it every single Sunday and watch it live and do the text comments and everything, and I really appreciate that. And then there's a bigger group who watch the YouTube video, you know, the following week or 2 weeks from then, or hell, 1 year from then, whatever. But the vast majority do listen to it just as an audio podcast, like in their cars or when they're, exercising, or I've been told when they go to bed because my voice is so soothing. So I'm not sure whether to take that as you got a great voice, Mike, or geez, Mike, you put me to sleep. So, well, who knows? I'm sure Matt has an opinion. You're just dying to say it, aren't you? No comment. I don't think your mic's working, Matt. That's good. If you were gonna, Uh, who's watching? There we go. Now we can hear you. Who's watching The Outsider on HBO?
I am.
Anybody else?
I haven't started it yet, but I am very excited to sit down after everything I've heard.
I think the third episode is tonight. Um, I don't have live TV or anything like that, but
It's the fourth.
oh, is it the fourth? Okay. I'm really pretty happy with it so far. What do you think, Rick?
I like it. I hadn't yet. I'll later read the novel. I just haven't had time to get up to Stephen King.
The
But
the
the plot.
so go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the plot is fascinating, and I wonder what the explanation is going to be.
Yeah. Um, I I know why you don't understand what happened in the barn because it's a lot more explicit in the book, and it's a very creepy scene in the book. And I don't. My only criticism of the Outsider TV series so far is that they don't really make plain what's happening in the same at all. You know. So. Um.
Sometimes,
Well, I
sometimes
that was
I was going to say sometimes I feel I need a summary of what I just saw by somebody.
the thing is, that's one of the things I liked about the book, that it took a while before exactly what was going on became clear. And even by the end, it was like, that's finally when everything was clear. So keeping it a little bit foggy at the beginning, I think is a good idea, right?
Well,
It's almost like two different books. The first half and the second half are completely different, yet they mesh together very well.
Yeah.
let me just give an example of. I think in the second episode there was a fight in a bar and some guy got arrested, and I wasn't sure because I'm watching this on regular television, not on widescreen. There was no close-up of who the guy was when he arrested. So I was wondering, was it this character or that character? Was it the bouncer or was it the cop?
I don't remember that part, to be honest.
You know, there's a fight. There's a fight in a bar, and some guy gets he maybe not arrested. He gets ejected at least.
I think it's the cop that got ejected. Now
Yeah,
that I
that's what I
think
later
about it.
realized. I think.
Yeah,
it was the cop.
that particular cop who's an asshole. The other interesting thing about The Outsider, the book and the miniseries, is that the protagonist is sometimes really hard to feel sorry for or get behind. I don't know what word to use because he made a humongous mistake, but at the same time, who among us in his position would not have made that mistake? You know? So, I don't want to spoil anything because it from the book or the series because they're both so great, but I am really enjoying it. So,
How many episodes is it going to run? Do you know?
I think 10.
Okay.
I think it was 10. Um, and I will tell you, HBO, staying on the topic of HBO, they're I think they're realizing these horror miniseries are the way to go. Here's an article from Bloody Disgusting. Uh, the headline reads, and there's a trailer: "A violent death and terrible revelations plague Nicole Kidman in HBO's thriller The Undoing," and it is a miniseries. And I watched the video and I have no fucking clue what this is about, but it looks fascinating as hell. So yeah, just maybe go to YouTube, anyone who's listening, when you get time, and just type in The Undoing trailer, HBO, whatever you want to type in. It looks very interesting, and I hope that HBO continues that trend.
At some point, HBO is going to do Lovecraft Country,
That's true.
probably this year.
Yeah, that's true. Um, Also, I have good news for myself, and I hope for everybody else. I have talked about this several times. I think I first started talking about this like 9 months ago. Oops, I clicked up the wrong thing here. Give me just a second. Um, there is a movie called Daniel Isn't Real, and I've been really, really wanting to see this. The premise sounds really fascinating, and I just found out that it's available to rent on Amazon. Uh, so if you're looking for something to watch, guys at home, look up Daniel Isn't Real, and it's supposed to be very, very good. I like the premise, so just throwing that out there. Uh, Go
Have
ahead.
any of you guys seen the Color Out of Space yet? The Nicolas Cage one that just came out this weekend.
I saw it at the HPL Film Festival back in October.
How was it?
It's like I'm not the right person to ask because on the one hand, I really liked it as a visual spectacle, a depiction on the big screen, really great visual effects, and the sound landscaping is quite amazing. But then they did some things with the plot that I thought were, I know you change the form of art when you convey it to the screen. It's not going to be what you read. You take it on its own. There's some things on there that I just thought were, okay, that's pointless baggage. Plus, I don't like it when Nicolas Cage goes over the top nuts when it doesn't.
Like he does in every movie.
Reason.
He's been doing that since The Rock or before.
Yeah.
But okay, it is really well worth seeing.
What in the name of Zeus's butt? How in the name of Zeus's butthole did you get out of your cell? He says to Sean Connery.
Well, I'm excited to see it. I really liked the last Nicolas Cage movie I watched was Mandy, so I'm very excited to see him freak out against sort of a cosmic weird backdrop.
Well, Richard Stanley is supposed to do a trilogy of films. He's doing the Dunwich Horror next. I don't know what the third one's going to be. Okay.
Speaking of regional cosmic horror.
Now, 4 or 5 years ago, he made a statement that The Color Out of Space needed more latex monsters, which really turned me off. But it sounds like this movie, I haven't seen it either. He's closer to what it should be. And, I applaud him for that. A lot of people seem to like it.
I don't think he overdid. It's like the creature effects were all very reasonable within context of the movie and the story. There was nothing that I thought was grotesquely over the top. It's like, oh, that really wouldn't fit in with the story. He did a very good job with that. I more have issues with, for example, the daughter being a Wiccan and her trying to cast spells and this having nothing to do with anything. I just thought it's like, okay, this was an unnecessary, avenue to go down. And then the idea that you're going to have David Chong on a trailer on the property as a well-known squatter, having some kind of mystic knowledge and is playing the role of a stoner. It's like, well, that's fine, but it doesn't really add anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, those are legitimate complaints.
The creature effects, I thought, were one of the glories of the movie.
Here's my main complaint, and it's not a complaint against Richard Stanley, but I want to see a Lovecraft adaptation, a Lovecraft movie that hasn't already been done. The Color Out of Space has been done. The Dunwich Horror has been done. The Whisperer in Darkness has been done. I mean, let's get to, I don't know, Shadow Out of Time. For God's sake, don't redo Shadow over Innsmouth.
Rats in the Walls would be good.
That's been done too, hasn't it?
I don't think so.
In a series. It was one of the stories in the series.
Wait, has there been a Shadows over Innsmouth movie?
Dagon.
Dagon? Okay.
And Cthulhu was also one.
And both of those movies are pretty terrible. I mean, so if someone
Dagon is not terrible. That town is exactly what Dagon should be.
It was dreadful. Okay, So if
So we disagree. Okay,
Well,
I'm looking for the
the,
eject button right now.
the makeup could have been better. That's the one criticism I have of Day.
That's true.
I would like to see actually a real good version of those movies. It's kind of like the Dunwich Horror. You really think that movie from the 70s merits the attention, the
No.
consideration that it's already been done?
No, it's just that
Oh,
I don't know. Maybe I just want to see At the Mountains of Madness so bad that I'm sick of all the rest of this stuff. I don't know.
I'm still heartbroken about Del Toro's Mountains of Madness.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Well, back when they didn't like the R rating. Now look at all these movies that are making millions and billions R ratings. Deadpool, Joker, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, R-rated horror is huge right now. Jordan Peele.
gosh,
Yeah.
Pete just had pointed us all to the movie Underwater, and I saw it this weekend. I really liked it.
My wife
But
loved it. Yeah.
It has tanked at the box office. Like, I think the budget's purportedly $60 million, and worldwide made like less than half of that. And probably it will eventually get it back in videos and stuff, but it's coming out of the theaters because it's not making any money, so it's a shame. And really, the depiction of the monsters on screen is quite fabulous, and
I
it would
agree.
warm the
Yeah.
cockles of any Lovecraftian's heart. And this is kind of like, to me, sort of discouraging that it's so good this way and it's tanking at the box office.
Well, here's what I do. I think I might do this. I was going to watch Daniel Isn't Real at home after the show. As I've said a million times, I rarely go to the theater, but I just pulled it up in my little hometown. Underwater is showing at 9:30 p.m. and I just might go.
The last 20 minutes are worth it alone.
Really?
Like, they're really, yeah, the creature work, Matt's absolutely right. It's really cool.
I
Okay.
gotta say, one good thing about this movie, Mike, is the runtime, including credits, is 95 minutes. And you know how bloated so many movies are now to get almost 3 to 3.5 hours. You're like, freak, I have to pee after the first hour, man. What the hell? This actually is short enough that you don't dwell on anything too long. You just get enough sense of the character, and there's sort of this relentlessly propulsive escape sequence going on the whole time, and they're being pursued, and it ends up being a very effective horror kind of situation. I liked it better than The Abyss, what was it, Deep Star 6,
That's
Leviathan,
not. Yeah, liking it better than Deep Star 6 is not high praise.
Well, no, but the thing is, this is actually what those movies might have aspired to. I think it's just really enjoyable.
I
And
liked
part
The
of the reason
Abyss,
it's
so
not
I'll
too
just
long.
throw that out there.
Yeah, it's a very different movie. For
Yeah,
me.
the Abyss is not a horror movie.
No, it's more of like an Amblin, like Spielberg, but by way of Cameron.
And it's more of a
Love story.
that too. But the world is bigger than we think it is kind of story. You got these. Well, if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to say, but I did like it. So even
Underwater is definitely worth checking out, though. Matt's right. It like stuff starts going wrong about 2 minutes in, and it just doesn't stop until the credits roll. Like it really doesn't waste a second.
Okay, all right, all right. Joe Pulver would love this. By the way, I did a video chat with Cat Pulver several hours ago. Joe was asleep. Joe has glasses now so that he can see a little bit better. Kat says that he watches the show live sometimes and she puts it on the TV. So, if you guys are all on TV right now, so you're TV stars.
Ooh, let's discuss contracts.
Yeah. Um, he's slowly getting better is the short version. And I told her that, Ben Handelman told me that there's a call-in feature to this show. You can just get on the phone and call in, and maybe we can get him on sometime soon.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I really miss Joe.
One thing about Joe,
Yes.
he is in the anthology Welcome to Miskatonic University with a story called Beneath the Surface, and it's one of his best stories.
Okay.
I
Great.
hardly recommend it.
Broken Eye Books.
Anyway, Joe would love this. This is from ihorror.com, and the headline is J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot producing DC's Justice League Dark. If I had $1 for every time Joe wished for a cinematic version of Justice League Dark, I'd have enough to go to that movie tonight. But it was a lot. So, I found that very interesting. It's going to have Swamp Thing, Zatanna, Constantine, and more, apparently.
I'm
So,
in.
yeah, I'm in too. Uh,
It would be curious if Marvel tries to beat them with a television version of Legion of Monsters, which was their sort of equivalent.
yeah.
There was Man-Thing, Morbius, Werewolf by Night, Ghost Rider, so forth.
I love Man Thing.
Uh,
He's so much weirder than Swamp Thing.
Did you ever see the Man-Thing movie?
Oh no! I've only read the comics, the Steve Gerber ones from the '70s. Is the movie good?
I haven't seen it yet. I think it's on Netflix. It didn't get great reviews, but I was just curious.
All right, here's another upcoming movie. This is from Bloody Disgusting. Danielle Harris is terrorized in a 50s themed roadside diner in an upcoming movie, In From Outside. We don't have a trailer, but here's the synopsis. 3 couples find themselves at a 50s themed roadside diner when one by one each of the patrons begin to disappear under mysterious circumstances. And they do have a what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry, not portrait. Sorry, sometimes my mind
Poster?
blanks. Poster, thank you. They do have a poster, and it's pretty badass. And I this sort of sounds really interesting, except for the part that Gary Busey's co-starring in it. So who knows? What else do we have? That might be it. You guys? Oh, I know what. Anyone seen The Lighthouse yet?
I watched it last night.
How was it?
It's weird.
Uh, I have no doubt that I'm going to like it when I watch it. So I got 3 movies to watch now. All these books to read. The Lighthouse. Danielle is Danielle. My wife's name is Danielle. Daniel Isn't Real, and Underwater. But I know I'm going to like the Lighthouse. But is it Lovecraftian, you guys? In any sense? Or should you not say?
I don't know that I'd say it's Lovecraftian. It's definitely weird. I still don't quite know what to make of it. I watched it last night, and I didn't have the immediate, like, when I saw The Witch, I walked out of that going like, yeah, but this one I'm still kind of scratching my head about, not in a bad way, but it's definitely, I don't know what the word for it is. Has anybody else here seen it?
Confused?
I mean, I don't think the movie's confused, but I'm definitely confused. I think the movie knows what it's doing. I'm just not sure what that is.
I didn't like The Witch, so.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh.
But I think I'll probably like The Lighthouse. So.
I mean, Willem Dafoe, both of those guys are amazing in it. So even if you don't like the movie, the performances are just incredible.
Yeah, Batman and the Green Goblin.
Green Goblin.
Yeah. So.
What's not to like? And some great imagery too. Like it's got some Lovecraftian imagery. I don't know. When you watch it, come back and let me know if you think it's Lovecraftian. I would love to hear that argument.
Okay, last but not least, Sabrina season 3. I've not seen. I've seen a half an episode of Sabrina.
I've seen it, and you'll be shocked out of your mind what they bring in.
Really? So I should
Lovecraft and beyond is the best way I can describe it.
Really?
So they bring
One of your favorite novels. that is not mythos or Lovecraftian.
My favorite novels?
One of your favorite novels, written in the 60s, set in October, plays a big influence on the plot.
Something wicked this way comes.
Yes.
Wow, yeah, that is. Okay, I guess I have to go through 3 seasons of Sabrina.
It's fun. It's a good show.
It's fun if you skip the first 2 seasons, and then read a synopsis of the third.
Should I just read a synopsis of the first 2 and watch the third? What would you say, Rick?
You can do that. I was saying you're not going to have to wait long for the Lovecraft connection. And there is you do see a genuine Lovecraft monster in chapter 2.
Really? Well, these creators definitely like Lovecraft. I mean, Riverdale with that Miskatonic crate and everything, but nothing. You keep waiting for something paranormal to happen in Riverdale, and it never does.
No, I've stopped waiting.
Yeah,
It's all
I'm
over
done.
in Sabrina. Yeah.
I'm done with Riverdale. Yeah.
Well, you don't have to wait for anything here.
In fact, I'm ashamed to admit on air, I may have to erase this, that I've even seen Riverdale. So, but what consoles me is that Matt, who is far, 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 far older than I am, has also seen Riverdale. So, I feel better.
No, I was just saying that to draw you out. I'd never watch such draws.
Uh, so, Paul, I hope we're not boring you in this section too.
No, love it.
Actually, I'm going to have to go, so I just want to remind everybody.
All right.
The prize today is this compilation of The Mask of Cthulhu and The Trail of Cthulhu by August Derleth. It's an old paperback copy. It is the prize. If you want it, just send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put Derleth in the subject heading. In a week or two, I'll draw a winner.
It's ezineprizes@gmail.com. So please stop sending me emails about about the prize. All right, thank you, Matt. Go cook dinner. I know that's what you got to do.
That is. I'll see you.
All right, thank you, bud.
Hi.
All right, so Paul's collection is Whispered Echoes. It's available in print and Kindle. Paul, I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I had a blast.
I'm really interested to read this Alexander song. I've got it up here on Amazon. So
Right.
that's his other book. For those who missed it the first time, Alexander's Song by Paul F. Olson. It's available on Kindle Unlimited if you have Kindle Unlimited, which is a very good thing to have, really. It's, as Paul said, not horror, but the theme, as you mentioned, it really intrigues me, Paul. So I'm definitely going to read that. So
Good. Looking forward to hearing what you think.
all right. Anything else, guys? No. Next week we'll have who are we having? Oh yeah, Daniel Kraus. Apparently, this is an arc. I've got to read all of this in between now and then, and try to pick out. I'm going to try to pick out the. I'm going to have to ask Daniel this. How do you pick out the Romero parts and the Daniel Kraus parts? You know, did he just take over after 2/3 of it was done, or what did he do? You know, who knows? So
Did he leave everything that was written alone except for grammatical corrections?
did he go in there and say, "Oh God damn it, Romero, this doesn't work. We're gonna fix this"?
Yeah, well,
Probably not.
When there were a lot of completions of Robert E. Howard, and it went from the guys who would leave exactly what he wrote and just continue it and just correct maybe grammar or tone down some racist passage or something like that in the original fragment. And it was like Lynn Carter who would rewrite Howard.
Yeah. Well, I'm no expert at all, but it seems like to me that they have to, for it to be a success, it has to merge seamlessly.
Yes.
You know, um, with no egos involved, saying, "Hey, I did this better than Romero," that sort of thing. But I will be
But
interested to hear how he did it.
but I think you have to leave what the original author wrote and don't try to rewrite it.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks everyone for listening. Paul, thank you again for being on the show, and I hope we
Thanks to
didn't.
all of you.
Yeah, I hope we didn't go
Thanks for coming.
off base too much for you.
Not
So,
at all.
um, thanks, and we will see everybody next week. Oh, also one last thing. Thanks for to the Patreons. I mentioned this briefly in regards to Rich, but man, we got some great Patreon podcasts coming up. I recorded a Patreon podcast with Laird Barron and John Langan. It's available now on the Patreon. Just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon. It's almost 3 hours. One of my patrons wrote, Santiago wrote, what a great podcast. I don't know how you guys do it. It's such a great mix of funny jokes and great writing insight that 3 hours felt like one. Uh, it, these guys are friends. I'm friends with them. They're just, it's a privilege to talk with them. And we've got other things coming up, like Pete Rollick's going to do Lovecraft in Context, which is really interesting. I won't explain that now. And we've got Rick Lay, the estimable Rick Lay, Mr. Encyclopedia, will be chatting with another Mr. Encyclopedia, Les Klinger. We're going to do that next Thursday, and then we'll put it up a few days after that. So I'm basically going to say, hey, this is Rick and this is Les, and then I'm going to shut up, Rick. So so, so don't count on me to say much. So, but that's going to be really, really interesting. Anyway, thanks everybody, and we will see you next week.